and welcome. In a previous unit, you learned that you can refine your description of where a plant grows natively by specifying its geographic distribution, or range. You can further refine your description by also specifying which plant community or communities the plant occurs in. In this video lecture, you'll learn what a plant community is and what the main plant communities are in California. So let's start by defining plant community. The same plants don't grow across the whole of California or its 3 floristic provinces. You only have to travel from Moss Landing to Gilroy or from Santa Cruz to San Jose, for example, to see how the vegetation can change within even relatively short distances. One of the concepts used by ecologists to classify these changing patterns of vegetation is plant communities. In his book, Designing California Native Gardens, author and botanist Dr. Glenn Keeter defines plant communities as repeatable assemblages of plants that grow together because of similar adaptations to complex interactions between both the abiotic and biotic factors in a particular location. So let's take a closer look at what that actually means, starting with repeatable assemblages. If you take Highway 1 south from, say, Point Reyes in Marin County to San Luis Obispo, you'll see similar types of plants growing in similar types of places. These are the repeatable assemblages, or combinations of plants, referred to in Glenn Keeter's definition of plant communities. In this photo, you can see one of the plant communities you'd noticed most frequently between San Luis Obispo and Point Reyes. This is the plant community known as coastal scrub, that's dominated by mounding shrubby plants that are less than 6 feet tall and typically grow on ocean-facing slopes. Let's take a look now at what abiotic and biotic mean. Abiotic means non-living, and in ecology refers to all of the non-living factors you can see in the diagram here. This diagram actually makes them look very simple, but in reality there are a multitude of complex interactions between abiotic factors which result in different types of habitat for plants. For example, volcanism and tectonic activity influence topography and geology, which in turn influence soil properties such as pH, alkalinity, nutrient content, and drainage and soil depth. Climate includes wind, precipitation, and temperature, which are all influenced by latitude, altitude, and aspect. Latitude, altitude, and aspect also influence light quality and quantity, while latitude also affects the length of the growing season for plants. Climate also has an influence on soil formation as a result of wind action, the movement of water, and freezing and thawing temperatures. Biotic means living, and the biotic factors that influence where and how plants grow are the myriad interactions between all living organisms. The result of biotic interactions is sometimes relatively simple and very visible to us humans. For example, the effect on plant growth resulting from grazing by animals such as deer and rabbits. But it's important to remember the vast number of interactions going on that aren't obvious to us. These include interactions between microorganisms and between both micro and macroorganisms. One example that you're probably already familiar with is the symbiotic relationship between soil-dwelling nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the genus Rhizobia and the roots of plants in the pea family, such as lupins. Abiotic and biotic factors don't operate independently of each other. There's a multitude of complex interactions constantly occurring between them. For example, an increase in rainfall might facilitate the spread of spores of the plant pathogen Phytophthora ramorum, which causes sudden oak death, resulting in an increased infection rate of tan oak trees and their subsequent death. As a result, there's more light in the forest, and better light provides opportunities for other plants to move in. And I'm sure you can think of many more examples of interactions between abiotic and biotic factors. So let's get back to plant communities. The term plant community is a useful concept, but arguably places too much emphasis on the role of plants. They are, of course, an essential component. They provide habitat for micro and macrofauna, add organic matter to soils, and of course, help to make the planet livable by providing oxygen through photosynthesis. A more holistic approach, though, might be to think of plant communities as just the plant component of whole ecosystems. An ecosystem can be described as a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment that together form a functional unit. Turning our minds briefly to cultivated landscapes, adopting an ecosystem approach to landscape design by considering plants' habitat value rather than just focusing on aesthetics is something we'll come back to later in the semester when we start discussing the benefits of including native plants in our cultivated landscapes. For now, here's just one small example of an ecosystem approach to plant selection. Planting a ceanothus such as the one in the photo here isn't just providing us humans with a glorious cloud of blue flowers to enjoy in spring, it's a small ecosystem. This ceanothus is a host plant for around 80 butterfly and moth species, including the California tortoiseshell. Adult females lay their eggs on the plant, and the caterpillars feed on the leaves when they hatch. They in turn provide food for birds and are a particularly important food source during nesting season. The shrub also provides pollen and nectar for many species of bees, plus shelter and nesting habitat for small birds. And later in the year, its seeds are a food source for seed-eating birds. This ceanothus really is a mini ecosystem. Let's take a look now at how plant communities are named. Plant communities can be named in a very broad and general way, or the name can be refined to be more locally or regionally specific. On a broad scale, the main plant communities in the California floristic province are chaparral, scrub, grassland, woodland, forest, and wetlands. The species composition of all these plant communities may vary from location to location, but the general appearance of the plants and the community in general remains similar. With the exception of wetlands, these broad designations are based on aspects of the general physiognomy of the plants in the plant community. Physiognomy refers to the general appearance of the dominant plants in the community. In this respect, grassland, woodland, and forest are self-explanatory. Scrub and chaparral aren't quite so clear though, unless you know the etymology of the words. The word scrub is derived from an Old English or Northern European word for shrub. So in scrub plant communities, the dominant plants are low-growing shrubs, usually less than around 6 feet or 2 meters tall. The word chaparral is derived from the Spanish word chaparro, which refers to a shrubby oak tree. Chaparral is the plant community that's characteristic of Mediterranean-type climates. In Chile, it's referred to as matorral, in Australia as mallee, in the Cape of South Africa it's fynbos, and in French-speaking parts of the Mediterranean basin it's garrigue. The characteristic plants in chaparral plant communities in all 5 of the Mediterranean-type climate regions are relatively large evergreen shrubs that are taller than 6 feet tall, with sclerophyll foliage. The word sclerophyll is derived from the Greek words sclero, meaning hard, and phyll, meaning leaf. It's the term applied to the tough, thick, leathery leaves of shrubs such as manzanita, bush poppy, and silk tassel. The names of these broadly defined plant communities can be refined using their dominant plants, plant types, or region. For example, forest might be refined or subdivided into coast redwood forest and mixed evergreen forest. Wetlands can be refined to include communities such as riparian woodland, freshwater marsh, or saltwater marsh like parts of Elkhorn Slough. Scrub is usually refined according to its biogeographic region, and so we have coastal scrub near California's coast and desert scrub in the desert floristic province. one last term relating to plant communities. When you've got a good vantage point and can look across a large expanse of open space, you can often identify the different plant communities by the general appearance of the plant assemblages. From a distance, it can sometimes look as if there's a really clear delineation between the margins of adjacent plant communities. For example, in this photo of Reinhardt Park in the East Bay, you can see a really clear delineation between the grassland and the coastal scrub here. When you're there in person, though, and you move closer in, you can see that those margins really aren't clearly defined. The plant composition doesn't change abruptly from one community to the next. There's a region of transition where the plant composition includes plants from both plant communities, and this area of transition is referred to as an ecotone. Finally, plant communities and ecosystems aren't static. They're dynamic, meaning they can change over time in response to changes in biotic and abiotic factors and anthropogenic factors. Their species composition may change, and there may even be a conversion from one plant community to another. Changes are often caused by a disturbance event, such as fire, flood, disease such as sudden oak death, or a change in grazing practices. Since the 17th century, species composition changes have also resulted from introduced non-native plants escaping cultivation and becoming naturalized. For example, the valley grassland plant community is now dominated by non-native annual grasses in genera such as Avena, Bromus, and Hordeum. Both species composition changes and plant community conversion have also resulted from fire suppression, originally by the banning of traditional burning, and more recently because of the risk that prescribed burns present to homes and developed areas. So what changes might climate change bring to California's plant communities and ecosystems? Nobody knows for sure, although researchers are trying to model the effects of different climate change scenarios. In habitat restoration, the goal in the past has often been to try and restore open space and plant communities to what they were prior to colonialization. One of the challenges facing land managers now, though, is that historic conditions may no longer be sustainable. So decisions have to be made about how to create resilience to climate change in these projects. I'll finish this video lecture by asking you to consider the question: what can we do in horticulture and in cultivated landscapes to build resiliency to climate change? And we'll come back to this question later in the semester. So let's finish this video lecture now with a quick summary. Think of plant communities as the vegetation components of whole ecosystems. Specifying the plant communities in which plants grow is another way of refining your description of where plants occur natively. Plant communities can be defined as repeatable assemblages of plants that grow together because of similar adaptations to complex interactions between the abiotic and biotic factors in a particular location. And finally, remember that plant communities aren't static. They're dynamic and can respond to changing biotic and abiotic factors, which are increasingly likely to include climate change. Thanks for listening. Go take a break now or head back to Canvas to continue with this unit.